When the ground beneath your existence begins to crack, there comes a time in every life that is a rupture that is silent but irreparable. It was not via violence, but rather through silence. It is not the crash of thunder that awakens you up. Rather, it is the silence that does so. That is the moment when you stop pretending that you are aware of who you are, and that is the time when the mask falls off. Not because you let it go, but because it becomes too heavy to carry. Not only is this not a crisis, but it is also not insanity. At this point, the self is at the point where it is beckoning you home. Despite the fact that you are naked, broken, and breathing into a quiet that resonates with all you have refused to feel, Carl Jung once remarked, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Here you are, exposed and broken." If you look closely, the beginning of awakening does not appear to be illumination. Rather, it appears to be loss. The loss of one's identity, one's meaning, and one's narratives that serve to keep one safe. As the stories you have told yourself about who you are start to fall apart, you come to the horrifying realization that, beyond the surface of the performance, you are not exactly who you claim to be. You didn't know about it. What you referred to as you was a fragile mosaic of survival instincts, societal dictates, infantile adaptations, and unconscious repression, all of which were stitched together with dread and habit. To survive, however, the soul, the deepest and most immortal part of you, does not speak. Rather, it communicates in quiet. And that silence, the one you've been trying to avoid by avoiding diversions, addictions, and noise, is not empty. It contains all of your truths. It contains all of your suffering. And it is the place where the shadow can be found waiting. There is no evil in the gloom, and it is not the darkness that you are tasked with destroying. It is the aspect of you that has been exiled, not because it was detrimental to your well-being, but rather because it was not convenient. It was filled with realities that your conscious self could not bring itself to acknowledge. The rage that you were warned was harmful, the desire that you were told was wicked, the grief that made other people uncomfortable, and the wisdom that threatened the current quo were all contained inside it. As a result, you buried it deep inside your unconscious, beneath layers of identity, such as the mask you wear to be accepted, the courteous smile, the measured tone, and the curated self that seeks acceptance rather than truth. What is repressed, however, does not perish. Rather, it waits. It continues to rot. The way you behave, the relationships you have, and the dreams you have all allow it to slide through the cracks. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. Awakening begins when you stop calling it fate. When you begin to question the patterns, the relationships that collapse the same way, the emotional spirals that seem to come from nowhere, the quiet misery you feel even when you have everything you thought you wanted. This is not a random occurrence. Rather, it is the language of a shadow, and it communicates with you through your pain. It does not intend to punish you, but rather to awaken you. For the simple reason that the agony of living a falsehood will convert you more quickly than anything else. The shadow does not intend to destroy you. Rather, it desires to be incorporated into your life. It is a desire to return home. Reclaiming the aspects of yourself that you have disowned is what it means to incorporate the shadow. In order to see your envy, arrogance, and manipulations, it is necessary to sit in the fire of discomfort and not run away from it. Instead, it is necessary to in order to justify them or to project them onto other people, you say, "This too is me." This is not said as an excuse, but rather as a sacred truth. It is not improvement. It is not becoming better. Rather, it is being entire. Integration is not improvement. Honesty is the source of healing. Absolute perfection is not the source of healing. Without flinching, you must face the mirror in order to do this. The majority of people do not want to be awakened. Rather, they want to be under anesthesia. They want just enough perception to make them feel unique, but not enough to cause them to unravel. However, a genuine awakening, as Jung referred to it, will cause your ego to be shattered. You will be stripped down to your skeletons by it. It is imperative that you remain silent since there is no instructor, no book, and no system that could travel this journey for you. Eventually, the voyage will turn inward, and on that interior journey, you will come face to face with the one person you have been avoiding for the entirety of your life, yourself. The raw, furious, incandescent self that recalls who you were before the world told you who you should be is the one that you should remember. Not the self that you post about on social media or the one that you exhibit to the public. This self has been muttering to you beneath your thoughts, beneath the masks you have been wearing. It conveys its message through synchronicities, dreams, and symbols. When everything else in the world is silent, and there is nothing but silence, it is the voice that you hear. There is no absence in silence. Rather, is presence. It serves as the channel via which the unconscious communicates with us. When there is silence, the shadow comes to the surface, and when there is silence, the self opens out. But we are afraid of silence because it poses a challenge to the illusions that we have constructed. There is no one left to impress, no one left to convince, and no one left to perform for when there is silence. You are the only person in the world, and if you're unable to identify who you are, silence will become intolerable. Because of this, we try to avoid it. Because we want to avoid the stillness that shows our emptiness, we fill our days with noise, our evenings with screens, and our minds with unending talk. We do anything to avoid the stillness. Nevertheless, nothingness is not a floor. Rather, it is the gateway to transformation and the womb of change. Carl Jung was aware of this fact. The most significant challenges that one faces in life cannot be resolved. Rather, they must be let go of. Furthermore, you do not outgrow them by thinking more. Rather, you outgrow them by feeling more deeply, by sitting in stillness for a sufficient amount of time to hear the voice of your own soul. The voice that is everlasting, the voice that remembers, is neither the voice that has been conditioned, nor is the voice that is afraid. What it recalls is that you are not broken. Rather, you are buried beneath the trauma, beneath the identity, and beneath the years of pretending that you are not damaged. Rather than attempting to improve yourself, it is your responsibility to expose who you are. The moments of silence, seclusion, and submission are the ones in which this revelation takes place. To awaken is not to transform into a different person. Rather, it is to rid yourself of all that is not you. The experience of suffering is not the adversary. Rather, it is the invitation, the breach in the defenses of the ego through which light might enter. It is the language of the unconscious that is calling you back to completeness, to dull our suffering, to pathologize our melancholy, and to run away from discomfort are all things that we have been taught to do. But what if the melancholy is a gift from God? If the discomfort is heavenly, what would you do? How would you feel if your worry were the soul's way of protesting an existence that is no longer suitable for it? According to Jung, loneliness does not come from being alone. Rather, it comes from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. However, how can you communicate what you consider to be important to you? Have not yet acknowledged that the initial communication must be with oneself, and that it must be honest, all the way through to being beautiful and brutally honest. You are obligated to admit to yourself the facts that you have concealed, the desires that you have ignored, and the wounds that you have accepted as normal. Individualization is the process of being who you truly are, not who you were taught to be or who others expect you to be, but rather who you were created to be. This is the route that leads to individuation. Along this path, you will incur costs. Your comfort, certainty, and connections that have been established on your silence will be lost as a result. However, what you get is legitimate. When you gain yourself, everything changes, including your relationships, your purpose, and your peace of mind. What you gain is an authentic, rooted, and integrated version of yourself. This is not because the world changed. Rather, it is because you changed. For this reason, you do not return to the person you were before, but rather to the person you were destined to become. That person who moves in tandem with their shadow rather than against it. The individual who no longer shy away from quiet, but rather lives within it. Whoever is aware that awakening is not a destination, but rather a devotion to truth, to wholeness, and to developing is the one who is awake. On some days, you will forget, and on other days, you will revert to your previous behaviors. We will let them go. It is the self that is patient. It waits behind every breakdown, behind every betrayal, and beneath every loss. It is waiting. The awakening is not a one-time occurrence. Rather, it is a pattern, a spiral, and a remembering that is sacred. Not only does it take place in the absence of light, but it also takes place in the absence of light, in the absence of noise, and in the areas where you believe nothing is changing. The entire world is taking place. Take your time and don't try to force things. Stay still, pay attention to the shadows, and have faith in the process of unraveling. Because being still enough to hear what has always been saying within you is the only way to genuinely awaken. The only way to truly awaken is to be present. The quiet is not devoid of sound. Rather, it is replete with the voice that you are destined to recall. This is the voice that tells you, you were never lost. You were just sleeping, and now you are waking up. Now that you are awake, you are experiencing a world that appears to be the same, yet has a completely different sensation. This is because the world is no longer viewed through the lens of illusion. Even if the structures are still standing and the people are still speaking, the power that their voices once held has diminished. You're no longer bound by that person's expectations. Under the rising sun of consciousness, the things that used to govern you, such as fear, validation, and approval, start to dissipate gradually like mist. Rather than being the result of arrogance, this is freedom that occurs as a result of clarity. The world is not abandoned by you. Rather, you recognize it for what it is, and by doing so, you reclaim your place in it. You do not recover your place in the world as a puppet or a performer. Rather, you reclaim your place as a conscious being who is accountable for your existence. The final truth that the shadow reveals is that the only jail you are a part of is the one you choose to occupy. That your suffering, despite the fact that it is real, was always a signal, a message from the most fundamental elements of you pleading to be heard. The feelings of panic, numbness, and wrath were never defects. Rather, they were sacred messengers, signs of misalignment, and evidence of truth that had been lost. The moment you stop pathologizing your sorrow and begin to listen to it, everything will change. You start to see that what you previously referred to as mental disease was frequently nothing more than a spiritual separation. When the world demands noise, silence is the answer. To be willing to break apart in order to remember what was never broken is a necessary condition. It is the paradox of awakening that follows. Despite the fact that it feels like death, it is life that is unfiltered, uncovered, and fearless. Instead of being governed by fear, life is lived from the inside out, with intuition serving as the guide. The essence, rather than the ego, is what drives them. Instead of being preoccupied with becoming, one is rooted in being. You're going to stop chasing, and you will stop explaining. Because you have touched something that is everlasting within yourself. You no longer require the world to mirror your worth. Not anything that can be named, but something that is known. Something that does not include a beginning or an end. There is something that has been waiting for you in the shadows, in the silence, and in the silence itself. Consequently, you continue to exist, not frozen, not stagnant, but unchanged. Even when storms rage around the mountain's crest, the mountain remains immovable at its core, showing that it is still in the way that it is. It is not passivity that this quiet is. Rather, it is force. This is the kind of force that does not yell, but rather alters everything it comes into contact with. You transform into the silence that you once dreaded. It is the stillness that observes without passing judgment, that receives without opposition, and that knows without the need for proof. You start to live your life differently as a result of this stillness. When you do talk, which is not very often, your words carry a lot of weight. You have fewer desires, but the things you do want are filled with spirit. When you finally start living life, you do not try to flee from it. Rather, you start living it from the core rather than from the surface. Every action you take at this moment reverberates with purpose. Each and every relationship serves as a reflection. Each obstacle serves as a learning opportunity. Why is this happening to me? Is no longer a question that you ask. Instead, I should be asking myself, what is this revealing about me? The reason for this is that you have come to see that the external world is nothing more than a reflection, a dream inside a dream, and a symbolic projection of the internal landscape. And when that terrain is filled with unconscious wounds, with realities that have been forgotten, and with aspects of yourself that have been marginalized, the world transforms into a battlefield. The world, however, transforms into a safe haven when it is brought into the light, when it is incorporated, and when it is reclaimed. There is no final arrival, no point at which you say, I'm awakened, and the process ends. This is the illusion that the ego creates, the demand for finish lines and the addiction to completion. Nevertheless, the soul is not concerned with accomplishment. Rather, it is concerned with depth, presence, and the disclosure of truth. The process of awakening is not a state. Rather, it is a spiral, a rhythm of remembering and forgetting, of losing and returning, of dying and being reborn. There are going to be times when the shadow will once again take control of you, when fear will come back, and when doubt will murmur. These moments are a part of the dance, so you should not feel ashamed of them. These things serve as a reminder that this road is not linear. Rather, it is living. It is not a clean existence. Rather, it is a dirty, sacred, wild, and beautiful life. You are not here to achieve perfection. Rather, you are here to complete yourself. This means carrying both the light and the dark, the joy and the sadness, the wisdom and the pain. It means carrying both of these things through. It involves recognizing and respecting your humanity in addition to your divinity. When you fall back asleep, it indicates that you must forgive yourself not only once, but multiple times over and over again. The reason for this is that even when one forgets something, the self does not forget. Put away. You should wait patiently and softly in the silence, in the breath, and in the space between your heartbeats, whispering, come back. And each time you do come back to your truth, to your core, and to the present, you will feel a little bit more liberated. Not because life becomes less difficult, but rather because your connection to it undergoes radical change. The pain will continue to occur, but it will not destroy you. You will continue to experience loss, but it will not define you. You still have feelings of loneliness, but you are no longer frightened by them because you are aware that even when you are by yourself, you are not alone. You are surrounded by the soul. The self resides within you, and the stillness, which was formerly intolerable, has finally become your safe haven. Your return to this place allows you to reassemble your thoughts, to listen to your guidance, and to discover your inner fortitude. Jung referred to this phenomenon as individuation, which is the process by which an individual becomes complete by incorporating their unconscious into their waking awareness and transforming into a unique expression of being rather than a clone of others. However, this is not self-help. Rather, it is self-discovery. The only work that truly matters is the work that you have been doing for your entire life. Everything else, including the striving, the proving, and the pleasing, starts to fade away. This is not because you are rejecting the world. Rather, it is because you have the ability to recall who you are inside it. Rather than being consumed, you are here to create, to embody, to awaken, and to become. You are not here to be consumed. It is not the silence of absence that grows deeper. Rather, it is the silence of presence, the silence of knowing, of seeing, and of being the silent that grows deeper. You are no longer attempting to crawl out of the shadows. Rather, you are walking through them. You no longer have the intention of destroying the shadow. Rather, you are holding its hand. You're no longer looking for light from the outside. Rather, you have become the light that shines from within. Being aligned is not the same thing as being arrogant. The light does not appear to boast. Rather, it merely shines. You are not required to persuade the world of your enlightenment. All you need to do is experience it for yourself. Allow it to be perceived in your eyes. Allow it to be experienced in your lack of movement, and allow it to be recognized in your compassion. The reason for this is that those who have achieved true awakening do not isolate themselves from the world. Rather, they accept it without becoming it. They are able to serve without forgetting who they are, and they love without compromising authenticity. Not because they are brave, but because they are free from the desire to be anything other than exactly who they are. They walk through fire. This is not because they are courageous individuals. And in that freedom, other people start to wake up as well. Not because you told them to, but because your presence reminded them of what they had forgotten. That they too are complete, that they too are divine, and that they too hold within them a stillness that can repair everything that they believe to be broken. Not enlightenment or perfection, but presence, realness, and serenity are the gifts that the soul that has awakened bestows upon its practitioner. A life that is lived from the inside out, a life that begins and ends in silence, a life in which the shadow is no longer feared but known, a life in which the self is no longer concealed but lived, and a life in which the soul is no longer distant but embodied. The voyage, the meditation, and the awakening are all happening right now. What is happening? Not with a commotion, but with a hushed whisper, not with replies, but with a question, not with effort, but with surrender, and not with a whisper, but with an inquiry. Eyes are able to breathe. Pay attention. Everything that you have been looking for is already present within you. It is there in the stillness, in the darkness, and in the truth. You have finally reached the point where you are prepared to listen, and in this reality, which is unfiltered and unflinching, you discover not the solace of assurance, but the freedom that comes from being honest. You start to realize that a significant portion of your life was a reaction rather than a creation, that a significant portion of what you thought was inherited rather than chosen. You were taught how to survive, how to adapt, how to please, and how to adhere to authority, but you were never taught how to be, in a manner that is not genuine, not heartfelt, and not whole. Your upbringing in this world taught you to put on a mask and call it personality, to obey laws and call it morals, to stifle your yearning and call it maturity. Nevertheless, beneath all of it, the true you remained unharmed, uncorrupted, and unaffected by the lies that you were required to accept in order to feel like you belonged. That portion of you, the inner self, does not communicate with you by directives. Rather, it communicates with you through symbols, dreams, longings that are incomprehensible, and the agony that you experience when the world seems empty, even on the days that you're doing the best. This anguish was something that Jung was familiar with. He referred to it as the voice of the unconscious, which he believed was the soul's attempt to communicate with you via the gaps in your conscious mind. However, if you never take the time to slow down, never listen, and never go into silence, you will never be able to hear it. Throughout your entire existence, you merely exist on the surface, acting rather than becoming, and achieving success rather than awakening. You call it a crisis when everything starts to fall apart, which is something that happens eventually, but you don't realize that it's your soul that is finally taking control of the situation. To properly meditate on something, you are not emptying your mind. Rather, you are meeting it. Something is what it means to meditate. You should sit in that sacred quiet and refrain from asking, how do I silence this? This applies to every idea, every worry, and every memory that you have attempted to escape. However, what exactly is this supposed to teach me? The reason for this is because the silence does not require you to flee from your humanity. Rather, it encourages you to observe it, to keep it, and to remain in it when the anxiety increases, when the guilt comes back, and when the old memories repeat over and over again like broken records. Stay here. Do not attempt to fix. Avoid getting into a brawl. Affect. The willingness to remain with what is without the expectation that it should be different is the environment in which transformation can take place. It is not linear, it is not aggressive, and it is not controlling. Rather, it is deeply intuitive, symbolic, and embodied. This is the feminine intelligence associated with the psyche. It is the anima, the feminine aspect of ourselves that resides within each and every one of us, regardless of our gender. Rather than gaining victory, she reveals herself. Instead of exerting pressure, she gives in. She reveals to you realities that the brain is unable to comprehend when you allow her to enter your life, and when you stop rejecting what surfaces in the midst of quiet. The stories that molded you, the betrayals that destroyed you, and the dreams that you gave up in order to survive are all revealed to you by her. It is not all at once, not in a burst of light, but rather in layers, in seasons, and in spirals that healing begins. This is the beginning of the healing process. What you never allowed yourself to feel, you can now grieve. You lament the person you had to transform into in order to be liked. The betrayals that you downplayed inspire you to wrath. The portions of you that dealt with the situation in ways that you now regret are forgiven. Despite the fact that it is not a straight line, this is a sacred place that is neither clean nor comfortable. It cannot be avoided. Not a meditation practice is the real thing. Practicing technique is about developing a relationship with your breath, with your body, and with the aspects of yourself that you have previously deemed unlovable. It is at this point that you start to understand that enlightenment is not a way out of the self, but rather a fundamental return to the self. A transcendence is not the same thing as an integration. When this integration takes place, the shadow transforms into a friend. You're no longer being sabotaged. Rather, it is now directing you. Every single trigger serves as an instructor. With each wound, a new gateway opens up. Every failure has the potential to be a rebirth. The darkness is no longer something you are afraid of. You enter it with your eyes wide and your heart open, and you discover the kid you abandoned, the artist you stifled, and the wild one you banished. You take their hand and bring them back to your front door, and you experience a sense of completeness for the very first time, possibly in your entire life. The feeling of completeness is not a sensation. Rather, it is a realization, a recollection of the fact that you are never too much, never too shattered, and never too late. The idea that every aspect of you, including the aspects that are messy, loud, irrational, and tender, are sacred, necessary, and divine. There is no longer any negotiation with oneself. Stop making excuses for the fact that you exist. Due to the fact that you are love, you discontinue performing for love. It is not the romantic ideal or the codependent bargain. Rather, it is the force that gives life to stars and make mountains more pleasant. The love that acknowledges paradox, that respects contradiction, and that declares, I see you, all of you, and none of it is wrong. It is not necessary to demonstrate anything to yourself when you love yourself in such a way. When you meditate, you become the message, and you become the miracle. It is possible that other people will not comprehend. They may accuse you of altering or of being aloof. But you are not far away. You have a strong foundation. At this point, you're no longer floating in the expectations of other people. Rather, you are firmly rooted in your own truth. That you are rooted in your soul is the factor that brings about all of the changes. Not immediately, but inexorably to come. Because your tolerance for things that are not true decreases in proportion to the amount of time you spend in moments of silence. You'll have less influence over your shadow the longer you continue to sit with it. You're less likely to give up on yourself the more you walk beside yourself. Instead of feeling guilty, you start to say no. Without any hesitation, you start to answer yes. As you begin to distance yourself from the things that bring you down, you do it without resentment, but rather with clarity. Instead of elaborating, you begin to embody the concept. Instead of requesting permission, you begin to put your faith in the authority that lies inside you. Because of this faith and this inner harmony, it is radiating. It is not necessary for it to be loud. It is also not necessary for it to be seen in order for it to be real. Having a human being who is aware of who they are, who has reconciled with their history, and who has confronted their demons and said, "You no longer frighten me," is the most subtle form of revolution. This is the last gift that the stillness has to offer. Not only does it heal, but it also gives freedom. It does more than just calm, it also stimulates. It not only brings you back to yourself, but it also brings you back to life, complete in the here and now, and authentic. And now, as everything returns to its normal state of silence, there's a final fact that you can no longer be ignorant of. The temple of your own soul is the most holy location you will ever visit. This is not a concept or an idea. Rather, it is a living presence that has been patiently and gently waiting for you to come back. It was never about becoming anything other. Rather, the voyage was about remembering what had happened. The masks, the roles, and the illusions were removed by G until the truth was the only thing that remained. Up until the point that the silence within you became melody, so that the wounds that were within you turned into openings, until the stillness that existed within you transformed into a voice that was unwavering, and unwavering. Also, what does that voice have to say? It does not guarantee people safety. This does not provide any shortcuts. Individuals will not find you more appealing as a result of this. It utters something that is substantially more perilous and significantly more beautiful. You were never broken. All that was done to you was to be buried behind fear, buried beneath shame, and buried beneath a world that makes money off of your rejection of yourself. Moreover, you are currently unburying yourself in a manner that is slow, bold, and delicate. This is not ego. Rather, it is the rise from the dead. And there is no such thing as a clean resurrection. It is a holy mess that is raw. Rather than passing judgment on the parts of yourself that continue to hurt, it involves coming back to those aspects again and over again and showing them love. In other words, it means living from the heart, even when your voice shakes, and especially when your voice shakes. When you stop feeling the need to be seen, you start seeing instead of being seen. When you look at the world with all of its beauty, its pain, and its chaos, you no longer feel like you're physically distinct from it. The toddler who cries out for affection, the addict who is searching for something to numb the pain, and the stranger who is unable to meet your eyes are all people that you identify as being yourself. Some people are stuck in the first chapter of their tale, others are lost in the middle, and a select few are courageous enough to write a fresh ending. You now understand that every single human being is a story that is evolving. Because you remember where you were, you do not pass judgment on where they are. Your presence is what makes it healing, since it is characterized by compassion, which is not born of superiority, but rather of shared humanity. Your words, your wisdom, your very being, your serenity, and your readiness to experience what others are unable to touch are not taken into consideration. This is what differentiates you from others, not because you are superior, but rather because you are genuine. In a world that is addicted to the fake, your reality is the medication that you need. You become a mirror, not for the egos of other people, but for the souls of those people. That reflection will cause some people to flee, while others will shed tears of appreciation. To be approved, however, you're no longer able to shapeshift. The act of maintaining connection through quiet is no longer something you do. Truth is more important to you than comfort, integrity higher than approval, and soul higher than survival. In addition, the entire universe starts to move in a different direction around you as a result of your choice. The number of synchronicities increases as new doors open without any effort while old doors close without any force. Not because you were able to influence life, but rather because you were in agreement with it. Because you have at long last risen to your proper position, neither as someone superior to others nor as someone inferior to them, but rather as yourself, complete, awake, and present. It dawns on you that even your suffering served a purpose, and that the same things that you believed disqualified you were actually preparing you for something. That each and every heartbreak made room for more presence, and that each and every breakdown freed you from what was actually true so that you could construct from what is actually true. In addition, you are currently constructing not in the manner that the world instructed you to do it, which is with status, noise, and speed, but rather with soul, depth, and careful sacredness. Rather of being based on logic, every decision you make right now is something that reverberates through your neurological system as a yes or a no. There's the knowledge of the soul, the intelligence of the mind, and the wisdom of the body. Listening and obeying are not acts of fear, but rather acts of devotion. Moreover, it is through this obedience that you find the freedom that you have always yearned for, the freedom to exist in the way that you truly are. This is the power of spiritual awakening. It is not the fantasy or the glitter, but rather the rebirth, the grit, and the grace, the quiet revolution that starts when you stop running away from yourself. The realization that each step you took away from your truth was a detour, not a mistake, but rather a guide towards your destination. And that map has brought you to this destination, to this very instant, to this very breath, to this holy silence. Thus, close your eyes, not in order to flee, but in order to see. Instead of performing, place your hand on your chest so that you can feel it. Listen, not for the purpose of finding answers, but for the purpose of remembering. You're not the only one. You are not running behind schedule. You have not fallen behind. The place that your soul requires you to be is exactly where you are. It is not a destination that one arrives to. Rather, awakening is a dedication, a practice, and a love affair with one's own soul. There will be days when it feels like magic, and there will be days when it feels like sadness. But we'll bring you back home each and every day. A home is not a physical location. Rather, it is a condition of being, a state of completeness, and a state of presence that is profound, unapologetic, and timeless. The light has not been found by you. Rather, you have become the light. As is the case with all genuine things, it started off in complete stillness.